I always have to laugh when people come barging into, for example, one of my videos, and they make the claim that evolution can't be right because something as complicated as the eye couldn't possibly have evolved. All that shows is that such a person, with regard to their understanding of how evolution is meant to work, if they have any at all, are firmly stuck in the 1860s. Now, of course, it is the year 2008. It's almost 150 years after Charles Darwin first published his original theory of evolution by means of natural selection. And since then, the field hasn't sat still. You need to understand that Charles Darwin came up with his theory based on evidence that even in 1859 was incontrovertible. What people also don't seem to understand is that there is a big difference between the fact that life evolved and the theory that Charles Darwin created in order to try and explain it. But life did evolve. That life evolved is a fact. So that's the second reason why you cannot simply say something like that without any sort of argument supporting it. So my typical reaction to that sort of a claim is to tell those people to go away. I'm not interested. And of course then you get the little accusatory finger pointed at you saying that you are closed-minded. Yes indeed, so closed-minded that I am not interested in every harebrained idea that gets chucked my way, especially if it is the same harebrained idea that I have been hearing for the last 30 years and that has become more and more ludicrous as time has been moving on. You see, people do not seem to understand that in the 30s and the 40s, Darwinism, or the theory of evolution by natural selection, and what seemed to be the conflicting mechanism of genetics that was discovered by George Mendel, were reconciled in something called the new synthesis. And Darwinism, Darwin's theory of evolution by means of natural selection, has had a huge boost since then. But it didn't even stop there. No, it didn't. Even in the last 1 or 2 decades, we have seen enormous leaps forwards in the theory of evolution. For example, something called Evo-Devo. And this is what I want to talk about right now. I want to recommend a couple of books to you. Now, these books, especially the first one, are very tough going. Scientific theories cannot be summarized in one sentence. By the way, think about it. Think about the sentence. The human eye couldn't possibly have evolved because it is too complex. Where is the argument in that? It is a statement of personal incredulity. It is a statement exposing the utterer's inability to understand modern evolutionary theories. It is nothing even remotely like an argument, and that is why I tell those people to go away. I'm not interested in personal statements of incredulity. So then, how could something as complicated as what we see around us, not just eyes, but all the wonderful manifestations of life on this planet, simply have evolved from random processes? Well, this is where those people hit the brick wall of their inability to comprehend what's going on. Like I said in the previous video, the random mutations only provide the input into this process. The evolutionary process, the natural selection, is a non-random process. It weeds out everything that doesn't work ruthlessly. But even then, you can understand why people say, how don't understand that something as complicated as what they see around us could possibly exist. And this is where evolutionary theory in the last couple of decades has made its huge leaps forwards, where we started realizing that a lot of development of organisms is based on simple templates, and that an awful lot of evolution is based on minor modifications to those templates, repetition, deletion, and modification. And that is something called Evo-Devo. Now, the two books I'm going to recommend here have both been written by Sean B. Carroll. The first one is this, Endless Forms Most Beautiful, and it is the hardest one to read of the two. This is very theoretical and very novel as well, especially with somebody with only a basic level of evolution. This goes very, very deep indeed, and it explains the mechanisms behind Evo-Devo and how it has allowed life to branch out into its multitude of beautiful forms that we see around us today. And also how this is based on fairly simple principles, and because of that, how this allows us to understand how today's complexity came about without having to resort to accepting long odds for anything, but that everything is based on very simple ideas. What's even better and easier to read is this book called The Making of the Fittest, again by the same author, Sean B. Carroll. And what is really beautiful about this is that this reads like a detective novel. It reads like a forensic statement, pointing the finger of guilt beyond any reasonable doubt at the theory of evolution, or evolution itself, showing that there cannot be any other explanation for how life came to be the way it was today other than evolution by natural selection. And what is the basis of all this? The basis of all this is the mapping out that we have been doing over the last decade or so of all sorts of genomes of different species on this planet. And the evidence that we have discovered within those genomes shows beyond any reasonable doubt how they have been evolving from one to the other, what relationships exist between different species, and that they are true relationships. He explains how statistical analysis of genomes works. He explains how from that statistical analysis we can show beyond any reasonable doubt that what we see in the genome of a species must be the result of a process like natural selection having been imposed on an input of random mutations, and how the only explanation that fits what we see in those genomes is that a rigorous process such as natural selection has been constantly weeding out everything that doesn't work and only allowing through those things that do work or those things that are neutral. With regards to things that are neutral, it shows how the pattern of mutations there do match a simple accumulation of random changes without any selection imposed on them. And again, that is incontrovertible proof that the species that we see have been evolving from common ancestors. So that is why whenever somebody barges into, for example, one of my videos and says, oh, but something as complicated as the eye couldn't possibly have evolved, I'm just going to tell them to go away. And I'm not going to bother myself explaining this over and over and over again. I have made videos like this before. I'll probably make them again. And that will have to do. Get a bloody education. Or else, accept that you're completely ignorant. You want to die ignorant? Fine, be my guest. But do not make such stupid claims.